Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Perfect Life. Derek Rodriguez had always believed in absolutes. In his 12 years as a Marine Corps reconnaissance specialist, there was mission success or mission failure, life or death, trust or betrayal. No gray areas, no second chances. Now, at 38, he applied that same unwavering logic to his civilian life as a private security consultant for high-profile clients. His wife of 10 years, Linda, often joked that he was too rigid, too serious. "You need to learn to bend, Derek, or you'll break," she'd say with that laugh that once made his heart skip. Their 6-year-old son, Timothy, was the perfect blend of both parents. Derek's determination and Linda's charm. At least, that's what Derek thought until 3 months ago when strange inconsistencies began appearing in his perfectly ordered world. Linda, a freelance marketing consultant, had suddenly become busier than ever. Late nights at the office, weekend conferences that seemed to multiply, and a new glow about her that Derek initially attributed to career success. She'd lost weight, changed her perfume, and started paying more attention to her appearance. When Derek mentioned it, she'd brush it off as finally taking care of myself again. But Derek's training had taught him to notice details others missed. The way Linda now kept her phone face down during dinner. How she'd shower immediately after coming home, even from short errands. The receipts for restaurants he'd never been to. Charged her credit card during lunch hours when she claimed to be working from home. Timothy had been acting strange, too. More withdrawn, less talkative about his daily activities. The boy who used to chatter endlessly about school and friends now gave monosyllabic answers when Derek asked about his day. Derek attributed it to normal childhood phases, but his instincts whispered otherwise. The wedding invitation had arrived 6 weeks ago. Linda's sister-in-law, Patricia, was marrying her longtime boyfriend in an intimate ceremony at the historic Riverside Manor. Derek had never particularly liked Patricia, too dramatic, too attention-seeking, but family was family. Linda had been unusually excited about the event, spending considerable time shopping for the perfect dress and coordinating details with other family members. "It'll be good for us to get out and celebrate something happy," Linda had said, her eyes bright with an enthusiasm Derek hadn't seen directed at him in months. "Timothy loves weddings, and it's been too long since we've done something as a family." Derek agreed, though he noticed Linda spent more time on her phone during the weeks leading up to the wedding than she did talking to him. She claimed it was all wedding-related coordination, helping Patricia with last-minute details. Derek wanted to believe her, but his trained mind cataloged every inconsistency, every small lie that didn't quite align. The morning of the wedding, Derek watched Linda get ready with the precision of someone preparing for battle. Every detail was carefully considered. The way her dress hugged her newly svelte figure, the jewelry that caught the light just so, the makeup applied with artistic precision. She looked stunning, more beautiful than she had in years, and Derek felt a familiar pang of love mixed with something darker he couldn't quite name. "You look incredible," he told her honestly, adjusting his tie in their bedroom mirror. Linda smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you. I just want everything to be perfect today." Timothy was unusually quiet during the drive to Riverside Manor, staring out the window with an intensity that seemed too mature for his 6 years. Derek caught his son's eyes in the rearview mirror several times, noting how Timothy looked away quickly each time, as if hiding something. "You okay, buddy?" Derek asked as they pulled into the manor's circular driveway. Timothy nodded but didn't speak. Derek made a mental note to check in with his son again later. The ceremony itself was picture perfect. Patricia looked radiant in her flowing white gown, and her new husband beamed with genuine happiness. Derek found himself studying the couple, remembering his own wedding day with Linda. The promises they'd made, the future they'd planned together. Everything had seemed so certain then, so permanent. As they moved to the reception, Derek noticed how Linda's attention seemed divided. She was present but distracted, checking her phone discreetly and scanning the crowd with an urgency that didn't match the relaxed atmosphere. When Derek asked if she was expecting an important work call, she quickly shook her head and slipped the phone back into her purse. "Just making sure I don't miss any of the photographer's group shots," she explained, but Derek noticed her hand trembling slightly as she reached for her wine glass. They found their assigned table near the back of the elegantly decorated reception hall. Timothy sat between them, picking at his food and observing the other guests with the same intense focus Derek had noticed in the car. The boy's behavior was becoming increasingly concerning, but before Derek could address it, the wedding party's entrance began, complete with a live band and coordinated lighting that transformed the space into something magical. Derek tried to relax, to enjoy the moment, but years of training had made hypervigilance his default state. He noticed everything: the way the best man's speech seemed rehearsed, how the maid of honor kept glancing toward their table, the photographer who seemed more interested in capturing candid moments than posed shots. Most disturbing of all was how Linda kept checking her phone despite her earlier explanation about group photos. As the evening progressed, Derek's unease grew. Linda excused herself twice for bathroom breaks that lasted longer than necessary. During this second absence, Derek watched her through the reception hall's large windows as she stood outside, engaged in what appeared to be an intense phone conversation. When she returned, her cheeks were flushed, and she seemed almost giddy with excitement. "Everything all right?" Derek asked. "Perfect," Linda replied, but her smile seemed forced. "Just family drama. You know how weddings bring out everyone's emotions." Derek nodded, but something about her answer felt rehearsed, like she'd been practicing it. He was about to probe further when Timothy suddenly grabbed his arm with surprising strength. Chapter 2. The Discovery. "Dad, let's go home. Right now." Timothy's whisper carried an urgency that made Derek's blood run cold. The boy's small hand gripped Derek's forearm with desperate intensity, his 6-year-old face pale with fear. Derek immediately shifted into alert mode, scanning the reception hall for potential threats while keeping his voice calm and reassuring. "What's wrong, buddy?" Timothy's eyes darted around nervously before fixing on Derek's face. "You didn't look under the table, did you?" The question seemed innocent enough, but something in Timothy's tone, a mixture of knowledge and terror, made Derek's instincts scream danger. He'd learned to trust his son's observations. Children often notice things adults missed, and Timothy had always been particularly perceptive. Derek slowly bent down, pretending to retrieve a dropped napkin while his eyes adjusted to the dim space beneath the table. What he saw there made his world tilt on its axis. Taped to the underside of the table was a small recording device, its red light blinking steadily. But that wasn't what froze Derek's blood. Next to it was a handwritten note in Linda's distinctive script. "Everything's ready. He suspects nothing. After the toast, we'll have everything we need." Derek's military training kicked in automatically. His face remained neutral, his breathing steady, but internally, every alarm was sounding. He straightened slowly, his mind racing through possibilities and implications. The recording device explained Linda's insistence on this particular table, her nervous energy, her phone calls. Someone was documenting their conversation, their interaction as a family. He looked at Timothy, really looked at him, and saw not a confused 6-year-old, but a child carrying the weight of adult knowledge. "How long have you known?" Derek asked quietly. Timothy's lower lip trembled. "I heard Mommy talking on the phone last week. She said mean things about you, Daddy. Really mean things. And she was talking to Uncle Bryce." Uncle Bryce, Derek's older brother by 3 years, the successful real estate developer who had always resented Derek's military service and close relationship with their father. Bryce had been the golden child until Derek enlisted and earned their father's respect through service and sacrifice. The sibling rivalry had never truly died, but Derek had never imagined it would manifest in such betrayal. "What kind of mean things?" Derek asked, keeping his voice gentle despite the rage building in his chest. Timothy glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned closer. "She said you were boring and mean, and that she couldn't wait to take half of everything and start over." and Uncle Bryce said he loved her and they could be together soon. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. Linda's behavior, her late nights, her sudden interest in fitness and appearance. It wasn't for herself or her career. It was for Bryce. Derek's own brother had been systematically seducing his wife, probably for months or even years. The recording device wasn't random. It was part of a calculated plan to gather evidence for what would undoubtedly be a vicious divorce designed to destroy Derek financially and emotionally. Derek's hands remained steady as he reached for his water glass, but inside, something fundamental shifted. The part of him that had tried to believe in second chances, in the possibility of redemption, died quietly. What replaced it was something colder, more calculating, the part of him that had made impossible decisions in impossible places and never looked back. "Timothy," Derek said quietly, "we're going to leave now, but we need to be very careful. Can you do exactly what Daddy tells you?" The boy nodded solemnly, understanding instinctively that this was serious business. Derek reached into his jacket and palmed his phone, activating the camera function with practiced discretion. He took several photos of the recording device and note, making sure to capture Linda's handwriting clearly. Then he sent a quick text to his personal attorney. "Emergency meeting tomorrow morning. Evidence of adultery and conspiracy." Linda returned from her latest bathroom break, just as Derek was helping Timothy into his jacket. Her face fell when she saw them preparing to leave. "Where are you going?" "The reception is just getting started." "Timothy isn't feeling well," Derek replied smoothly. "I think it's best if we head home early." Linda's eyes darted to the table, then back to Derek's face, searching for any sign that her plan had been discovered. "Maybe I should come with you," she offered, but Derek could hear the reluctance in her voice. "No need to ruin your evening. Stay and enjoy the party. Timothy and I will be fine." Linda hesitated, clearly torn between maintaining her cover and ensuring her recording device remained undisturbed. "Are you sure? I hate to leave you alone with a sick child. I've handled worse situations with less support," Derek replied, his tone carrying just enough edge to remind her of his military background. "We'll be fine." He guided Timothy toward the exit, moving with purposeful casualness that wouldn't attract attention. As they walked away, Derek could feel Linda's eyes burning into his back, probably wondering whether her elaborate scheme had been compromised. In the car, Timothy was quiet until they were well away from Riverside Manor. Then, in a small voice, he asked, "Are you and Mommy getting divorced?" Derek's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What makes you ask that, buddy? Kids at school say that's what happens when parents stop loving each other. And Mommy doesn't look at you the same way anymore." The observation hit Derek harder than any physical blow. If a 6-year-old could see the dissolution of their marriage, it had been crumbling longer than Derek had realized. He'd been so focused on work, on providing and protecting, that he'd missed the slow erosion of everything he'd thought was solid. "Sometimes adults make choices that hurt other people," Derek said carefully. "But no matter what happens between Mommy and me, I will always love you, and I will always be your father. That never changes." Timothy nodded, but Derek could see tears forming in his son's eyes. "Will I still get to live with you?" The question ignited something fierce and protective in Derek's chest. The recording device, Linda's betrayal, even Bryce's treachery, all of it paled compared to the thought of losing daily access to his son. Whatever Linda and Bryce had planned, whatever evidence they thought they were gathering, Derek would make sure their scheme backfired spectacularly. "You'll always have a home with me," Derek promised, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. As they drove through the quiet suburbs toward their house, a house that no longer felt like home, Derek's mind was already working through possibilities. His military contacts, his security industry connections, his intimate knowledge of surveillance and counter-surveillance techniques. Linda and Bryce thought they were playing chess, but they just declared war on someone who'd spent his career in much deadlier games. Derek Rodriguez had never lost a mission that mattered. He didn't intend to start now. Chapter 3. The Gathering Storm. Derek spent the sleepless hours after midnight in his home office, the door locked and his laptop screen casting blue light across his face. Timothy was finally asleep after 2 bedtime stories and multiple reassurances that everything would be okay. Derek had tucked his son in with promises he intended to keep, no matter the cost. Linda had returned home around 1 a.m., her heels clicking against the hardwood floors with the careful precision of someone trying not to appear intoxicated. She'd peeked into Derek's office, offering a vague explanation about helping clean up after the reception, but Derek had simply nodded and continued working. She seemed relieved by his apparent disinterest and retreated to their bedroom without further conversation. What Linda didn't know was that Derek had spent those midnight hours conducting reconnaissance on his own life. Bank statements, phone records, credit card transactions, property deeds, all of it spread across his computer screen in a pattern that told a story of systematic betrayal. The evidence was damning and thorough. The private investigator Derek had used for client background checks had been more than willing to work through the night for triple rates. Marcus Holloway was an ex-cop with a reputation for discretion and results. By dawn, Derek had a comprehensive dossier on Linda and Bryce's relationship, complete with time-stamped photographs, hotel receipts, and communication records. The affair had been going on for 8 months, beginning during a family barbecue where Derek had been called away for a work emergency. It wasn't casual or accidental. It was calculated, passionate, and surprisingly sophisticated. Bryce had been funding Linda's business trips and work conferences while Derek paid their family's bills. They'd been using burner phones for most communication, but had gotten careless with their personal devices in recent weeks, probably confident that Derek remained oblivious. Most disturbing was the evidence of their longer-term planning. Bryce had been consulting with a divorce attorney for 3 months, strategizing how to maximize Linda's settlement while minimizing her responsibility for marital debt. They discussed claiming emotional abuse, financial control, and even military-related PTSD as grounds for Linda needing substantial support. Derek's service record, which he'd always considered an honor, was being weaponized against him. But Derek had found something else in his digital investigation. Something that changed the entire game. Bryce's real estate business, while successful on the surface, was heavily leveraged and dependent on a few major investors. More importantly, Bryce had been cutting corners on safety inspections and using substandard materials in his low-income housing developments. The potential liability was enormous if the right person were to document the violations and present them to the proper authorities. Derek had also discovered that Linda's marketing consultancy was essentially fictional. She'd been using the business as a front to launder money for Bryce's accounts, creating fake invoices for services never rendered. It was tax fraud on a significant scale, potentially criminal, and completely unrelated to their affair. It seemed his wife and brother weren't just betrayers, they were criminals. At 6 a.m., Derek made his first phone call of the day to Ben Torres, his former squad leader who now ran a private military contracting firm in Virginia. Ben specialized in what he called complex problem resolution for clients who needed situations handled with absolute discretion. Derek Rodriguez. Ben's gravelly voice came through the secure line. Been a while, brother. What's the situation? I need a full workup on 2 targets, Derek said without preamble. My wife and my brother. They're planning to destroy me financially and take my son. I need leverage. I need it fast. Ben was quiet for a moment. This personal or professional? Both. They've been embezzling money and committing fraud, but I need more than that. I need something that makes them understand they've made a catastrophic mistake. Copy that. Send me everything you have. I'll have a team on it within 12 hours. Derek's second call was to his attorney, Rachel Kim, a former military JAG officer who specialized in complex divorce cases involving security clearances and military assets. She agreed to meet him at 9 a.m. Sunday morning for an emergency consultation. The third call was to his father, retired Colonel Miguel Rodriguez, whose Sunday morning run was interrupted by news that his sons were at war with each other. I always knew Bryce resented you, Miguel said after Derek explained the situation. But I never thought he'd stoop to this level of betrayal. What's your plan, son? I'm going to destroy them both, Derek replied without hesitation. Systematically, completely, and permanently. By the time I'm finished, they'll wish they'd never met each other, let alone decided to betray our family. Be careful, Derek. Revenge can consume you if you're not disciplined about it. This isn't revenge, Dad. It's justice. And justice requires precision. By 8 a.m., Linda was awake and moving around the house with nervous energy. She kept glancing at Derek, probably wondering if his early departure from the wedding had disrupted her recording plans. Derek maintained his normal Sunday routine: coffee, news, preparation for Timothy's soccer game, while internally cataloging every word and action for future use. "How are you feeling this morning?" Linda asked, her tone carefully casual. "You seemed tired last night." "I'm fine," Derek replied. "Timothy's feeling better too. Kids bounce back quickly." Linda nodded, but Derek noticed her relief was palpable. She thought her secret was safe, that her elaborate plan remained undetected. It was almost enough to make Derek feel sorry for her. Almost. "I was thinking," Linda continued, "maybe we should plan a family vacation soon. Just the three of us. We haven't done that in a while." The suggestion was so audacious that Derek almost laughed. She was already planning her exit strategy, probably hoping to gather more evidence of his controlling behavior or create situations where she could document his reactions to stress. Every conversation was now a potential weapon in her arsenal. "That sounds nice," Derek agreed. "Where were you thinking?" "Maybe somewhere relaxing. A beach resort where we can just unwind and reconnect as a family." Derek nodded thoughtfully, already imagining how such a trip would be documented and later used against him in court. Linda's strategic thinking was actually impressive, if not for the fact that it was aimed at destroying him. His phone buzzed with a text from Ben Torres. "Preliminary findings interesting. Your brother has bigger problems than you know. Full briefing in 24 hours. Derek smiled for the first time since discovering the recording device. Whatever Bryce and Linda had planned, they were about to learn that Derek Rodriguez was not the soft target they'd assumed him to be. His military training hadn't made him paranoid. It had made him prepared. And preparation, applied with surgical precision, was about to become their worst nightmare. "I need to run some errands this morning," Derek told Linda. "Timothy has soccer practice at noon, so I'll be back by then." "Of course," Linda replied, probably already planning how to use his absence to coordinate with Bryce. "Take your time." Derek kissed her forehead, a gesture that felt like saying goodbye to someone already dead. In 48 hours, Linda and Bryce's world would begin crumbling around them. Derek would make sure of it. As he drove toward his attorney's office, Derek caught himself humming an old military cadence. It felt good to be back in mission mode, to have a clear objective and the tools to achieve it. Linda and Bryce had declared war on his family. Now, they were going to learn what war actually looked like. Chapter 4. The counterattack begins. Derek's meeting with attorney Rachel Kim lasted 3 hours and covered every possible angle of attack and defense. Rachel had handled enough military divorces to understand the unique vulnerabilities of service members, and she was particularly skilled at turning those vulnerabilities into strengths when her clients were prepared to fight back. The recording device gives us probable cause for an investigation into their other activities, Rachel explained, spreading the printed evidence across her conference table. "If we can prove conspiracy and fraud, we can flip this entire situation. Instead of you being the defendant in a messy divorce, they become the defendants in a criminal case." Derek studied the financial documents that painted a clear picture of Bryce and Linda's criminal enterprise. "How long do we have before they make their move?" "Based on a timeline, I'd guess they're planning to file within the next 2 weeks. The recording device suggests they want evidence of you in an uncontrolled emotional state, probably triggered by some manufactured crisis. Classic manipulation technique. Then we strike first," Derek decided. "I want restraining orders, asset freezes, and criminal referrals filed by Wednesday morning." Rachel nodded approvingly. "I like working with clients who understand preemptive action. But Derek, once we do this, there's no going back. This becomes total war." It became total war the moment they decided to involve my son in their scheme. That afternoon, Derek attended Timothy's soccer game with the focused intensity of someone gathering intelligence. Linda arrived separately, claiming she'd been running last-minute errands. But Derek noticed her phone was buzzing constantly with messages she answered discreetly from the sidelines. During halftime, Derek's own phone rang with a call from Ben Torres. "Your brother is in deep trouble," Ben reported without preamble. "The construction shortcuts are worse than you thought. 3 of his buildings have serious structural issues that could result in casualties if there's an earthquake or major storm. He's been bribing inspectors and falsifying safety reports for 2 years. What about financial exposure? Massive. If the right person filed complaints with the State Licensing Board and Building Safety Commission, he'd be looking at criminal charges, civil liability in the millions, and complete business destruction. His insurance won't cover criminal acts, so he'd be personally liable for everything." Derek felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. What else? "The money laundering through your wife's fake business is amateur hour compared to what Bryce has been doing. He's been using construction loans for personal expenses and investor money for project materials. It's a house of cards that could collapse with the right pressure. I want documentation for everything. Full evidence packages ready from multiple agencies. Already working on it. But Derek, there's something else. Our surveillance team picked up a conversation between your wife and brother yesterday. They're planning to accuse you of threatening them physically. They want to provoke an incident they can document." Derek's jaw tightened. The recording device at the wedding had been just the beginning of their evidence-gathering operation. They were trying to create a narrative of him as an unstable veteran prone to violence, a story that would resonate with judges and custody evaluators. "When and where?" "Tomorrow night. Your wife is planning to confront you about some manufactured issue when your son isn't around. Bryce will be nearby, probably recording everything. They want you to lose control so they can claim fear for their safety." "Perfect," Derek said, surprising Ben with his calm response. "That gives us exactly what we need." "How do you figure?" "Because I'm going to give them exactly what they want, except it won't go the way they planned." After the soccer game, Derek spent the evening setting up his own surveillance system throughout the house. Micro cameras and audio recording devices, professionally installed and completely undetectable. If Linda and Bryce wanted to document his behavior, Derek would make sure he had comprehensive documentation of theirs. He also reached out to Dr. Sarah Martinez, the child psychologist who had evaluated Timothy the previous year when he'd been having nightmares. Dr. Martinez agreed to an emergency session on Monday morning to assess Timothy's emotional state and document any signs of manipulation or coaching by adults. Monday morning brought the first phase of Derek's counterattack. While Linda was at her fake job and Timothy was at school, Derek met with representatives from the State Building Safety Commission, the Tax Fraud Investigation Unit, and the Real Estate Licensing Board. Each agency received comprehensive evidence packages documenting Bryce's criminal activities, complete with dates, financial records, and witness statements. By noon, search warrants were being prepared for Bryce's business offices and personal residence. The agencies moved quickly when presented with evidence of safety violations that could result in public harm. Derek's afternoon was spent with Dr. Martinez and Timothy, whose psychological evaluation revealed a child under significant stress from adult conflicts he didn't fully understand. Timothy had been coached to keep secrets about his mother's phone conversations and had been explicitly told not to mention certain people who had visited their house when Derek was away. This child is exhibiting signs of emotional manipulation, Dr. Martinez told Derek privately. He's been put in the position of keeping adult secrets, which is psychologically harmful. I'm legally obligated to report this to Child Protective Services. Do what you think is best for Timothy, Derek replied. His welfare is my primary concern. That evening, Derek waited for Linda's manufactured confrontation with the patience of a sniper. She arrived home at 7 p.m., clearly agitated and checking her phone constantly. At 7:30, she started the fight they'd obviously planned. "Derek, we need to talk about your behavior lately," Linda began, her voice carrying artificial concern. "Timothy told me you've been asking him strange questions about our family." Derek remained calm, aware that every word was being recorded by multiple devices, his and theirs. "I've been concerned about his emotional state. He seems stressed about something." The only thing stressing him is your paranoid questioning. You're making him afraid of his own mother. The accusation was perfectly calculated to provoke anger, but Derek had spent years learning to control his emotions under pressure. Instead of responding with the outburst they expected, he asked quietly, "Linda, is there anything you need to tell me about our marriage?" The question clearly wasn't in their script. Linda hesitated, glancing toward the window where Bryce was undoubtedly positioned with recording equipment. "What kind of question is that?" she deflected. "The kind of question a husband asks when he knows his wife is planning to leave him." Linda's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." Derek pulled out his phone and played a recorded conversation between Linda and Bryce, captured by Ben Torres' surveillance team. Their voices filled the room, discussing timeline for divorce filing, asset division, and their elaborate plan to frame Derek as an abusive husband. "The question is," Derek said into the stunned silence, "whether you want to face this as adults or continue with your pathetic charade." Linda stared at the phone, her entire body trembling with the realization that their carefully planned operation had been compromised from the beginning. Outside, Derek could see Bryce's silhouette moving quickly away from the window. "How long have you known?" Linda whispered. "Since Timothy showed me the recording device at the wedding," Derek replied. "You involved our son in your scheme to destroy me. That was your first mistake." "Derek, I can explain." "No need. Tomorrow morning, you'll be served with divorce papers, restraining orders, and criminal fraud charges. Bryce will be dealing with building safety violations, construction fraud, and tax evasion charges. Your fake business will be audited by the IRS, and your personal assets will be frozen pending investigation." Linda's face cycled through disbelief, fear, and finally desperate anger. "You can't prove anything." Derek smiled coldly. "Linda, I've spent years in situations where failure meant death. You and Bryce thought you were playing games with someone who would just roll over and accept betrayal. You were wrong." As Linda fled the house, probably to warn Bryce of their complete exposure, Derek felt the familiar satisfaction of a mission accomplished. But this was just the beginning. Tomorrow, the real destruction would begin. Chapter 5. The Destruction Unfolds. Tuesday morning arrived with the precision of a military operation. Derek was awake at 0500, reviewing final preparations while Linda slept fitfully in their guest bedroom. She'd moved there after their confrontation, claiming she needed space to think, but Derek knew she was actually coordinating with Bryce about damage control. What neither of them realized was that Ben Torres' team had compromised their communications completely. Every panicked phone call, every desperate text message, every frantic email was being monitored and recorded. Linda and Bryce's attempt to salvage their situation was only providing more evidence of their criminal conspiracy. At 0800, Derek received confirmation that the first wave of legal actions had been executed flawlessly. Process servers had delivered papers to both Linda and Bryce simultaneously, ensuring neither could warn the other. Restraining orders prohibited them from contacting each other, accessing joint assets, or coming within 500 feet of Derek or Timothy. Bryce's construction company was raided by state building inspectors and fraud investigators at 0830. Workers were evacuated from 3 job sites pending safety evaluations, and Bryce's business bank accounts were frozen pending investigation. Local news crews, tipped off by anonymous sources, captured footage of Bryce being escorted from his offices in handcuffs. Linda's morning was equally devastating. IRS agents arrived at her fake business address, a mail drop service she'd been using to create the illusion of legitimate operations. When they discovered the fraudulent setup, they expanded their investigation to include her personal finances and tax returns for the past 3 years. Derek watched the morning's developments unfold from his attorney's office, where he was finalizing custody arrangements and asset protection strategies. Rachel Kim had arranged for an emergency hearing that afternoon, where Derek would present evidence of Linda's unfitness as a parent due to her criminal activities and psychological manipulation of Timothy. The judge will likely grant temporary full custody given the evidence of parental alienation and criminal conspiracy, Rachel explained. But prepare yourself for Linda to make serious accusations in response. Desperate people do desperate things. Derek nodded. Having anticipated this escalation, I've documented everything and have witnesses for my whereabouts during any time period she might claim abuse or threats occurred. At noon, Derek received an unexpected call from his father. "Derek, Bryce just showed up at my house. He's panicking, claiming you've destroyed his life over a simple affair." "What should I tell him?" "Tell him the truth," Derek replied. "This isn't about an affair. It's about fraud, conspiracy, and involving my son in a criminal scheme. If he wanted to sleep with my wife, he should have done it honestly instead of trying to destroy me in the process. He's asking me to intercede to convince you to call off the investigations." "Dad, would you intercede if a stranger had committed fraud against me and tried to manipulate your grandson?" "Of course not." "Then don't intercede now. Bryce chose to be my enemy when he chose to betray our family." The afternoon custody hearing was a masterclass in legal preparation. Derek's attorney presented a devastating case that painted Linda as a manipulative criminal who had involved a minor child in adult conspiracy. The evidence included Timothy's psychological evaluation, recordings of Linda coaching the boy to keep secrets, financial documents proving fraud, and testimony from multiple witnesses about Linda's behavior and associations. Linda's hastily retained attorney attempted to portray Derek as a controlling military veteran prone to surveillance and paranoia, but the argument fell apart when confronted with the mountain of evidence proving Linda's actual criminal activities. "Your Honor," Derek testified when called to the stand, "I served my country for 12 years in situations where trust and reliability were matters of life and death. I applied those same standards to my family life. When that trust was betrayed, I investigated like any reasonable person would. What I discovered wasn't marital problems. It was criminal conspiracy designed to defraud me and psychologically damage my son." The judge, a veteran herself, was clearly sympathetic to Derek's position. "Mrs. Rodriguez, the evidence suggests you've not only engaged in adultery, but also fraud, conspiracy, and child manipulation. Pending resolution of the criminal charges against you, I'm granting Mr. Rodriguez temporary full custody of the minor child." Linda's face crumpled as the reality of her situation hit home. She'd lost her husband, her son, her freedom, and her financial security in a single day. As she was led from the courtroom by her attorney, Derek felt no satisfaction, only cold justice. That evening, Derek picked up Timothy from school personally, explaining in age-appropriate terms that there would be some changes in their living arrangements while the adults sorted out some complicated problems. "Is Mommy in trouble?" Timothy asked as they drove home. "Yes, buddy. She made some choices that weren't good for our family. But none of this is your fault, and it doesn't change how much both Mommy and Daddy love you." "Will she go to jail?" Derek considered the question carefully. Linda was facing multiple felony charges with substantial evidence against her. Even with plea negotiations, prison time was likely. "I don't know yet," Derek answered honestly. "But whatever happens, you'll always have a safe home with me." That night, Derek received a call from Ben Torres with an update on Bryce's situation. "Your brother's business is completely finished. 3 buildings are condemned pending major repairs. Investigators found evidence of bribery and fraud going back 5 years, and his insurance company is denying coverage for criminal acts. He's looking at bankruptcy, criminal charges, and civil lawsuits from investors and tenants." What's his response? He's hired a crisis management firm and is trying to blame everything on rogue employees and bad contractors. But the evidence trail leads directly to him, and his own communications contradict his claims of innocence. Derek felt the familiar satisfaction of a mission completed successfully. Bryce had spent years resenting Derek's achievements and respect within their family. Now he would spend years dealing with the consequences of his choices. As Derek tucked Timothy into bed that night, his son asked one more question. "Daddy, are you sad about Mommy?" Derek considered the question seriously. Was he sad about Linda? Or was he sad about the illusion of Linda that had never really existed? "I'm sad that our family changed," Derek answered carefully. "But I'm not sad that we discovered the truth. Sometimes the truth hurts, but it's always better than living with lies." Timothy nodded with the serious wisdom of a child who had learned too much about adult deception too early. "I love you, Daddy. I love you too, buddy. Always. As Derek turned off the lights and closed Timothy's bedroom door, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months: peace. The mission was far from over. There would be trials, appeals, and years of legal proceedings. But the primary objective had been achieved. His son was safe, his betrayers were facing justice, and Derek Rodriguez had once again proven that underestimating him was a costly mistake. Chapter 6: The Price of Betrayal. 3 weeks after the initial raids and arrests, Derek stood in what had once been Bryce's luxurious downtown office, now empty except for boxes of evidence being cataloged by federal investigators. Bryce's construction empire had collapsed with stunning speed once the investigation revealed the full scope of his criminal activities. The morning newspaper featured a front-page story about the scandal, complete with photos of condemned buildings and interviews with displaced tenants. Bryce Rodriguez, once considered one of the city's most promising young developers, was now facing federal charges for fraud, bribery, and endangering public safety. The estimated financial damage exceeded $12 million, with potential criminal liability that could result in decades in prison. Derek felt no satisfaction looking at the destruction of his brother's life, only a cold sense of justice completed. Bryce had chosen to attack Derek's family through deception and betrayal. Derek had responded with a systematic application of truth and law. The outcome was inevitable once Bryce decided to play by rules he didn't understand. Linda's situation was equally devastating, but more personally painful for Derek to witness. The woman he'd once loved was now facing her own set of federal charges, including tax fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Her fraudulent business had generated over $200,000 in unreported income, all of which would now be subject to penalties, interest, and criminal prosecution. More damaging than the financial crimes was the custody evaluation that had been completed the previous week. Dr. Martinez's report documented clear evidence of parental alienation and psychological manipulation of Timothy. Linda had coached their 6-year-old son to spy on Derek, to keep secrets about adult relationships, and to provide information that could be used in legal proceedings. The child exhibits signs of anxiety and confusion consistent with being placed in age-inappropriate roles by the mother, Dr. Martinez had written. The pattern of behavior suggests systematic manipulation designed to serve the mother's interests at the expense of the child's emotional well-being. The report recommended supervised visitation only, with mandatory psychological evaluation and parenting classes before any consideration of expanded custody. Linda would see Timothy for 2 hours every other weekend, under professional supervision, until she could demonstrate rehabilitation and genuine concern for his welfare. Derek found himself thinking about Linda more than he wanted to admit. Not the woman who had betrayed him, but the young marketing professional he'd fallen in love with 10 years ago. That woman had been ambitious, intelligent, and genuinely caring. Somewhere along the way, she had transformed into someone capable of using their own child as a weapon. The psychological evaluations ordered by the court had revealed troubling patterns in Linda's thinking. She showed signs of narcissistic personality disorder, with an inability to accept responsibility for her actions and a tendency to blame others for consequences of her choices. The affair with Bryce hadn't been a moment of weakness. It had been the culmination of years of resentment and entitlement that Derek had never recognized. She believes she deserves whatever she wants, the court-appointed psychologist had explained to Derek during a private consultation. When reality doesn't match her expectations, she manipulates situations and people to create the outcome she desires. Your son became a tool in that manipulation. Derek had asked the question that haunted him. Could I have prevented this? Were there warning signs I missed? Mr. Rodriguez, people with these personality patterns are often very skilled at hiding their true nature, especially early in relationships. They present the version of themselves that serves their immediate needs. Your military training probably made you value loyalty and directness, which would have made you less likely to recognize sophisticated deception in someone you trusted. The explanation helped, but didn't eliminate Derek's sense that he should have protected Timothy better. A 6-year-old child shouldn't have to carry the weight of adult secrets or worry about betraying his father's trust. Timothy was adapting to their new reality with remarkable resilience, though Derek knew the long-term effects of his parents' divorce would unfold over years. They'd started weekly therapy sessions with a child psychologist who specialized in helping children process parental conflict and betrayal. "He's actually doing better than many children in similar situations," Dr. Ellen Rodriguez, no relation, had told Derek after Timothy's third session. "He feels safe with you, and he understands that the problems between his parents weren't his fault." Children are remarkably adaptable when they have at least one stable, trustworthy parent. Derek's father had become a regular presence in their lives, helping with Timothy's care and providing the kind of grandfatherly stability that helped counterbalance the chaos. Miguel Rodriguez had been devastated by Bryce's betrayal, but philosophical about its inevitability. Bryce always wanted what others had instead of building something for himself. Miguel had observed during one of their Sunday dinners, "I hoped military values would eventually influence him through your example, but some people are too focused on shortcuts to appreciate honest work." The financial aspects of the divorce had been surprisingly straightforward once Linda's criminal activities were exposed. The prenuptial agreement Derek had insisted on before their marriage protected most of his assets, and Linda's fraud conviction eliminated any claim to spousal support. She would receive only a minimal settlement from marital assets acquired after her criminal activities began. Derek's security consulting business had actually benefited from the publicity surrounding his methodical destruction of Linda and Bryce's schemes. Corporate clients were impressed by his thoroughness and discretion, leading to several high-profile contracts that significantly increased his income. "You've become something of a legend in our industry," Ben Torres had told Derek during their latest briefing. "People are saying if Derek Rodriguez can dismantle his own family's conspiracies this efficiently, imagine what he could do to business competitors or hostile takeover attempts." Derek found the reputation both useful and disturbing. He never wanted to be known for destroying people, even people who deserved it. But he also understood that reputation was power, and power could be used to protect the people he cared about. The most surprising development had been his relationship with Timothy's teacher, Amanda Chun, a kindergarten educator who had worked with Timothy throughout the most difficult period of the divorce. She'd approached Derek with concerns about Timothy's behavior at school, leading to conversations that gradually evolved into a friendship that seemed to be heading toward something more. Amanda was everything Linda wasn't: direct, honest, genuinely nurturing toward children, and completely uninterested in Derek's financial situation or social status. She'd seen him at his most stressed and vulnerable, managing single parenthood while dealing with criminal proceedings, and had offered support without expecting anything in return. "Timothy talks about you constantly," Amanda had told Derek during their first coffee meeting outside school. "He's proud of his father in a way that shows real trust and security. That doesn't happen by accident." Derek found himself hoping that Timothy would have the chance to see what a healthy adult relationship looked like, something to counterbalance the dysfunction he'd witnessed between his parents. But he was also cautious about introducing new complications into Timothy's life while the boy was still processing the loss of his mother's daily presence. As Derek prepared for the final phase of legal proceedings, Linda and Bryce's criminal trials, he reflected on how completely their roles had reversed. Linda and Bryce had started their scheme believing Derek was a naive target who could be manipulated and discarded. Now, they were facing the consequences of underestimating someone whose training and temperament made him uniquely suited to long-term strategic thinking. Derek Rodriguez had never broken a promise to someone he cared about, and he'd never left a mission incomplete. Linda and Bryce's punishment was far from over. Chapter 7. The Final Judgment. 6 months after the wedding reception that changed everything, Derek sat in federal court watching Linda take the witness stand in her own defense. She looked different, thinner, older, with the kind of stress lines that came from months of legal pressure and public humiliation. Her expensive clothes had been replaced by a conservative suit that suggested poverty rather than success. The trial had been a masterclass in prosecutorial efficiency. The evidence against Linda was overwhelming, meticulously documented, and impossible to dispute. Phone records, financial transactions, surveillance footage, and her own recorded conversations created an irrefutable timeline of criminal conspiracy. Her defense attorney had tried to portray her as a victim of Bryce's manipulation, but the jury clearly wasn't buying the narrative. Derek watched as Linda attempted to explain her actions to 12 people who had heard weeks of evidence about her calculated betrayal of her husband and son. She claimed the affair was emotional desperation, the financial crimes were Bryce's idea, and the manipulation of Timothy was an attempt to protect him from his father's controlling behavior. Mrs. Rodriguez, the prosecutor asked during cross-examination, when you recorded conversations with your husband without his knowledge, what was your intention? I wanted evidence that he was psychologically abusive, Linda replied, her voice barely audible. Yet in hundreds of hours of recorded conversations, investigators found no evidence of abuse, threats, or controlling behavior. Instead, they found evidence of a concerned father asking appropriate questions about his child's welfare. Isn't that correct? Linda's silence spoke louder than any answer could have. Bryce's trial had concluded the previous month with a conviction on all charges. 23 counts of fraud, bribery, and endangering public safety had resulted in a sentence of 15 years in federal prison and restitution of $14.2 million. His assets had been seized, his business completely dismantled, and his reputation permanently destroyed. During his sentencing hearing, Bryce had attempted to blame Derek for his downfall, claiming his younger brother had orchestrated a vendetta that destroyed an innocent man's life. The judge had been unimpressed. Mr. Rodriguez, Judge Patricia Owens had said, your own communications and business records document years of criminal activity that had nothing to do with your brother's investigation. You built your empire on fraud and endangerment. The fact that your crimes were exposed during a family dispute doesn't make you a victim. It makes you unlucky. Derek had felt no satisfaction watching Bryce led away in shackles, only the grim completion of necessary justice. His brother had chosen betrayal over loyalty, crime over honest work, and personal gain over family bonds. The consequences were severe, but entirely predictable. Now, watching Linda face her own judgment, Derek experienced the same cold satisfaction. The woman who had shared his bed, raised his child, and planned his destruction was about to learn that actions had permanent consequences. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Owens asked. We have, Your Honor. Derek glanced at Timothy, who was staying with his grandfather during the trial proceedings. The boy was doing remarkably well considering the circumstances, but Derek knew the real healing would begin only after this chapter finally closed. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of tax evasion, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of money laundering, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of child endangerment through psychological manipulation, how do you find? Guilty. Linda's legs buckled as the verdicts were read. Her attorney steadied her, but Derek could see that she was finally understanding the magnitude of her situation. She'd gambled everything on a scheme that required Derek to be weak, stupid, and helpless. Instead, she discovered what happened when someone with military intelligence training decided to wage total war. During the sentencing phase 2 weeks later, Derek was called to provide a victim impact statement. He thought carefully about what he wanted to say to the woman who had been his wife, the mother of his child, and the architect of their family's destruction. Your Honor, Derek began, looking directly at Linda, the defendant didn't just commit crimes against me. She committed crimes against our son. She used a 6-year-old child as a weapon in a scheme designed to destroy his father. She coached him to lie, to spy, and to carry adult secrets that no child should bear. That's not just criminal, it's evil. Linda was crying now, but Derek felt no sympathy for her tears. I served my country for 12 years, including combat deployments where I risked my life for people I'd never met. I came home to find that the person closest to me was willing to destroy our child's sense of security for financial gain. There's no punishment severe enough for that betrayal. Judge Owens sentenced Linda to 8 years in federal prison, with supervised probation for 5 additional years. She would serve her time at a minimum security facility designed for white-collar criminals, but 8 years was 8 years. Timothy would be 14 when his mother was released, old enough to make his own decisions about their relationship. As Linda was led away in handcuffs, she looked back at Derek one final time. He saw no remorse in her eyes, only resentment that her scheme had failed. Even facing prison, she couldn't accept responsibility for her choices. Dr. Martinez had been right about Linda's psychological profile. She would probably never genuinely understand why her actions were wrong. Outside the courthouse, Derek was approached by several reporters asking for his reaction to the verdicts. He prepared a brief statement that he hoped would close this chapter of his life permanently. Justice was served today for crimes that harmed not just me, but my son and our entire family. I hope this sends a message that betraying people who trust you carries serious consequences. My family will now focus on healing and moving forward. That evening, Derek picked up Timothy from his grandfather's house. They went to dinner at their favorite restaurant, where Timothy asked the question Derek had been expecting. "Daddy, will I ever see Mommy again?" "Yes, buddy. When you're older, if you want to see her, we'll make that happen. But she has to serve her punishment first, and you have to understand that she made choices that hurt our family." "I know," Timothy said with the serious tone he developed over the past months. "I'm not mad at her, but I don't miss her like I thought I would." The admission broke Derek's heart and relieved him simultaneously. Timothy was processing the loss of his mother with remarkable maturity, but Derek knew there would be difficult moments ahead as the boy grew older and understood more about what had happened. "That's okay," Derek assured him. "You're allowed to feel however you feel about this situation. There's no right or wrong way to handle it." As they drove home through their quiet suburban neighborhood, Derek reflected on how completely his life had changed in less than a year. He'd lost a wife and brother, but gained clarity about what really mattered. Timothy was thriving. His business was more successful than ever, and he was building a relationship with Amanda that felt genuine and healthy. Derek Rodriguez had learned that betrayal revealed character, both in the people who committed it and in those who responded to it. Linda and Bryce had shown who they really were when they thought they held all the power. Derek had shown who he was when that power was stripped away and redistributed. The war was over. Derek had won completely, permanently, and without compromise. But more importantly, Timothy was safe, and their future together was secure. Everything else was just the price his enemies had paid for underestimating the wrong man. Chapter 8: The Reckoning. 1 year after the wedding that exposed everything, Derek stood in his new home's kitchen, preparing breakfast for Timothy and Amanda Chun, who had gradually become a regular part of their Sunday morning routine. The house was smaller than the one he'd shared with Linda, but felt more like home than anywhere he'd lived since childhood. Timothy, now 7, was building an elaborate fort out of couch cushions while explaining to Amanda's 4-year-old daughter, Sophie, the proper engineering principles for structural stability. Watching his son mentor a younger child with patience and enthusiasm, Derek felt the satisfaction of seeing Timothy's natural leadership qualities emerge despite the trauma he'd experienced. Amanda appeared in the kitchen doorway, her dark hair still tousled from sleep, wearing one of Derek's old Marine Corps t-shirts. Their relationship had developed slowly, carefully, with both of them prioritizing the children's adjustment over their own romantic impulses. But after months of friendship that gradually deepened into love, they'd begun discussing the possibility of combining their families permanently. "Any word from your lawyer about the appeal?" Amanda asked, accepting the coffee Derek offered. "Denied," Derek replied with satisfaction. "Linda's sentence stands, and she's exhausted her legal options. Bryce's appeal was denied last month. They're both exactly where they belong." The past year had brought a series of final victories in Derek's methodical destruction of his betrayers. Linda had attempted to appeal her conviction on grounds of inadequate legal representation, claiming her attorney hadn't adequately prepared her defense. The appellate court had reviewed the case and concluded that no amount of preparation could have overcome the overwhelming evidence of her guilt. Bryce's situation was even more devastating. His attempt to appeal his sentence had backfired when investigators discovered additional evidence of fraud during the appellate review process. Instead of reducing his sentence, the court had added 3 more years for previously undetected crimes. He would now serve 18 years in federal prison, ensuring he'd be nearly 60 when released. But the legal victories were only part of Derek's comprehensive destruction of his enemies. The social and financial consequences had been equally thorough. Linda's parents, who had initially supported her during the early stages of the divorce, had completely severed contact after learning the full extent of her crimes. Her manipulation of Timothy had particularly enraged her mother, who had previously doted on her only grandchild. The psychological evaluation that documented Linda's systematic abuse of Timothy had convinced even her most loyal supporters that she was beyond redemption. Bryce's wife had divorced him immediately after his conviction, taking their 2 children and moving across the country to escape the scandal. She'd reverted to her maiden name and obtained a restraining order preventing Bryce from contacting their children until they reached adulthood. His own parents had effectively disowned him, removing him from family wills and trusts. The professional consequences had been equally devastating. Both Linda and Bryce were prohibited from working in their respective fields due to their felony convictions. Linda's marketing consultancy had been permanently shut down, with clients receiving restitution from seized assets. Bryce's construction company had been dissolved, with all assets sold to pay restitution to victims. Derek had ensured that their crimes became public knowledge through strategic media engagement. He'd cooperated with journalists investigating construction fraud and divorce scheme cases, providing background information that resulted in multiple news stories about the dangers of trusted individuals committing sophisticated financial crimes. Rodriguez's case highlights need for due diligence in personal and professional relationships. One prominent business magazine had headlined, featuring Derek's photo alongside statistics about domestic fraud. The article had significantly raised Derek's profile in the security consulting industry, while ensuring that Linda and Bryce's names would forever be associated with betrayal and criminality. More satisfying than the public humiliation was the knowledge that Derek had protected other potential victims. The investigation into Bryce's construction fraud had led to industry-wide reforms in building safety inspections and contractor oversight. Several other developers had been caught using similar schemes, preventing potential structural failures that could have resulted in injuries or deaths. Timothy had thrived during his first year of life without his mother's toxic influence. His anxiety had disappeared, his grades had improved, and his relationship with Derek had deepened into the kind of father-son bond Derek had always hoped for. The boy no longer carried the weight of adult secrets or worried about betraying confidences. "Dad," Timothy said, emerging from his fort construction project, "Sophie wants to know if her mommy can live with us forever." Derek glanced at Amanda, who blushed but smiled encouragingly. They discussed marriage several times, but both wanted to ensure the children were completely comfortable with the idea before making it official. "What do you think about that idea?" Derek asked Timothy. "I think it would be good," Timothy replied with characteristic seriousness. "Sophie needs a daddy, and I like having a sister. And Amanda makes you smile more than you used to." The observation was both touching and accurate. Derek hadn't realized how rarely he'd smiled during the final years of his marriage to Linda until Amanda pointed out how different he seemed when relaxed and genuinely happy. "Well then," Derek said, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, "maybe we should make it official." Amanda's gasp drew Timothy and Sophie's attention, and soon all 4 of them were clustered around the kitchen island as Derek formally proposed to the woman who had helped him rebuild his life and heal his son's wounded heart. "Will you marry me?" Derek asked, offering the simple but elegant ring he'd chosen with Timothy's input. "Yes," Amanda replied, tears streaming down her face. "Absolutely yes." As Derek slipped the ring onto Amanda's finger, he felt a completeness he'd never experienced during his first marriage. Linda had been a performance, a carefully constructed illusion of compatibility that had hidden fundamental incompatibilities. Amanda was genuine partnership, shared values, complementary strengths, and mutual respect that made them stronger together than either could be alone. The engagement celebration was interrupted by Derek's phone buzzing with a text from his father. Bryce tried to call me collect from prison. I declined the charges. Some people never learn. Derek showed the message to Amanda, who shook her head in amazement. After everything that's happened, he still thinks he can manipulate family relationships? Bryce has never accepted responsibility for his choices, Derek explained. He probably thinks enough time has passed that family loyalty should override justice. He's wrong. Derek had received several indirect attempts at reconciliation from both Linda and Bryce over the past year. Linda had asked mutual friends to suggest that Derek consider allowing unsupervised visitation with Timothy. Bryce had attempted to reach out through their father, claiming he'd found religion in prison and wanted to make amends. Derek had rejected all overtures without consideration. His position was simple. Betrayal of family was unforgivable, and attempts to manipulate children for adult purposes were irredeemable. Neither Linda nor Bryce had shown genuine remorse for their actions, only regret that their schemes had failed. "Will you ever forgive them?" Amanda asked, reading Derek's thoughts. "No," Derek replied without hesitation. "Forgiveness implies they deserve another chance to hurt the people I care about. They don't." Amanda nodded approvingly. She'd seen the psychological evaluation reports documenting Linda's manipulation of Timothy and understood that some actions were too harmful to excuse or forget. That afternoon, as Derek and Amanda began planning their wedding while the children played in the backyard, Derek reflected on how completely his life had been transformed by his enemy's betrayal. If Linda and Bryce hadn't overplayed their hand, he might have remained trapped in a dysfunctional marriage while they slowly destroyed him through smaller, more subtle deceptions. Their greed and arrogance had forced a confrontation that revealed everyone's true character. Derek had proven himself capable of protecting what mattered most. Linda and Bryce had proven themselves unworthy of trust or mercy. And Timothy had proven himself resilient enough to thrive despite witnessing the worst aspects of adult behavior. Derek Rodriguez had entered the war against his family reluctantly, but had prosecuted it with the thoroughness and brutality his enemies deserved. The victory was complete, permanent, and irreversible. His betrayers would spend years paying for their crimes while Derek built a new life based on honesty, respect, and genuine love. Justice had been served. The mission was complete. Chapter 9. The Price of War. 5 years had passed since the wedding reception that changed everything. Derek Rodriguez stood in his backyard, watching his 12-year-old son Timothy coach Sophie through proper batting stance while their younger brother Michael, now 3, attempted to catch butterflies in the outfield. The scene represented everything Derek had fought to protect and build, a family based on trust, loyalty, and genuine affection. Amanda emerged from the house carrying a pitcher of lemonade, her pregnancy with their second child together showing prominently beneath her summer dress. They'd married 18 months after the destruction of Linda and Bryce's conspiracy, building their relationship on the foundation of shared values and complementary strengths that Derek had never experienced in his first marriage. "Any word from your attorney about Linda's release?" Amanda asked, settling into the patio chair beside Derek. "She's out," Derek replied matter-of-factly. "Released yesterday after serving her full sentence. No early release for good behavior. Apparently she had several incidents with other inmates and staff." Linda had served all 8 years of her federal sentence at the Federal Correctional Institution in Dublin, California. According to Derek's contacts within the federal prison system, she'd proven to be a difficult inmate who blamed others for her situation and refused to participate in rehabilitation programs. Multiple disciplinary infractions had eliminated any possibility of early release. "Has she attempted contact?" Amanda asked, knowing the answer but needing to hear it confirmed. 3 letters sent to my business address, all returned unopened. 2 attempts to reach Timothy through his school, both reported to authorities as violations of the restraining order. She's testing boundaries to see what she can get away with. Derek had anticipated Linda's release and prepared accordingly. The restraining order remained in effect until Timothy reached 18, and Derek had ensured that all institutions in Timothy's life, school, sports teams, medical providers, had been notified of Linda's release and legal restrictions. Timothy had been informed of his mother's impending release and had reacted with the emotional maturity Derek had come to expect from his eldest son. At 12, Timothy understood the situation's complexities better than many adults would have. "I don't really remember her anymore," Timothy had told Derek during one of their regular father-son conversations. "I mean, I remember some things, but it's like remembering a movie I saw a long time ago. Amanda is my mom now." The statement had been both heartbreaking and encouraging. Linda's 8-year absence during Timothy's most formative years had effectively erased her emotional significance in his life. Amanda had become his primary maternal figure, and their bond was based on daily care, consistent presence, and genuine affection rather than biological connection. Bryce remained in federal prison and would for another decade. His attempt to manipulate their father into reconciliation had failed completely, and his own children had been raised to understand that their father was a criminal who had chosen betrayal over family loyalty. They'd thrived under their mother's care and had no interest in reconnecting with Bryce when he was eventually released. Derek's business had grown exponentially during the 5 years since his enemy's downfall. His reputation for thoroughness and discretion had attracted high-profile clients from Fortune 500 companies to foreign governments seeking security consulting services. The Rodriguez Security Group now employed 43 people and maintained offices in 6 cities. The irony wasn't lost on Derek that his systematic destruction of Linda and Bryce had become the foundation of his professional success. Corporate executives understood that someone capable of dismantling his own family's conspiracies with such precision could certainly protect their interests from external threats. "There's something else," Derek told Amanda, pulling a legal document from his jacket. "Timothy has officially filed to have his name legally changed." Amanda looked surprised. "To what?" "Timothy Rodriguez, John. He wants to honor both families, but make it clear that you're his real mother now." The gesture represented Timothy's complete emotional separation from Linda. He'd chosen to legally acknowledge Amanda as his maternal figure while maintaining connection to Derek's family heritage. It was a mature decision that demonstrated Timothy's understanding of family as something built through choice and commitment rather than mere biology. Derek had been prouder of Timothy in that moment than any other in the boy's 12 years. His son had learned the most important lesson Derek could teach. Loyalty was earned through consistent action, not demanded through blood relation. The doorbell rang, interrupting Derek's reflections. Through the front window, he could see a woman who looked vaguely familiar but significantly aged. It took him a moment to recognize Linda's mother, Patricia, whom he hadn't seen since before the trial. Derek answered the door cautiously, noting how much Patricia had aged in 5 years. The stress of her daughter's criminal conviction and imprisonment had clearly taken a significant toll. "Hello, Derek," Patricia said nervously. "I know this is unexpected, but I was hoping we could talk." "About what?" Derek asked, not inviting her inside. "About Linda and Timothy. She's been released, and she's struggling. I thought maybe, for Timothy's sake, there might be some way to arrange supervised visits or—" "No," Derek interrupted. "Timothy has made his own decision about Linda. He's legally changed his name to remove any connection to her. There will be no visits, supervised or otherwise." Patricia's face crumpled. "Derek, she's still his mother. She served her time, paid her debt to society. Surely some mercy." "Patricia," Derek said, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded Marines in combat, "Linda didn't just commit crimes against me. She psychologically abused Timothy, used him as a weapon, and tried to destroy his relationship with his father. There's no debt of time that can repay that damage. But family is what you build through loyalty and sacrifice," Derek continued. "Linda chose to destroy our family for personal gain. That choice has permanent consequences. Timothy has a mother now, Amanda, who earned that role through love and consistency. Linda forfeited her claim to motherhood when she chose to harm her own child." Patricia began crying, but Derek felt no sympathy for her tears. She'd raised Linda, probably instilling the sense of entitlement and manipulation that had led to the conspiracy against Derek's family. The apple, as the saying went, didn't fall far from the tree. "Please," Patricia begged. "Just one meeting. Let her see what a fine young man he's become." "Timothy has seen what Linda is capable of," Derek replied. "He made his choice based on that knowledge. I won't override his decision to protect his emotional well-being for the convenience of someone who forfeited the right to be his mother." Derek closed the door firmly, ending the conversation. Through the window, he watched Patricia walk slowly back to her car, shoulders shaking with sobs. He felt no guilt about his refusal, only satisfaction that Timothy would never have to face the manipulation and emotional blackmail that Patricia's visit represented. When Derek returned to the backyard, Amanda looked up questioningly. "Linda's mother," Derek explained, "tried to arrange some kind of reconciliation. I told her Timothy had made his own choice and we would respect it." Amanda nodded approvingly. "Good. That woman helped create the monster Linda became. Timothy doesn't need that poison in his life." As the sun set over their suburban paradise, Derek reflected on the completeness of his victory over the people who had tried to destroy him. Linda was free but isolated, facing a world that had moved on without her. Bryce remained imprisoned, forgotten by everyone except the victims seeking restitution. Timothy had grown into a confident, caring young man who understood the difference between family by birth and family by choice. Derek Rodriguez had proven that betrayal carried permanent consequences, that some actions were unforgivable, and that loyalty was the foundation of any relationship worth preserving. His enemies had learned too late that underestimating a man trained in warfare was a fatal mistake. The war was over. Derek had won completely, and his victory would last generations. His children would grow up understanding that trust was precious, that betrayal was costly, and that family was something you built through daily choices rather than inherited through blood. Justice had been served. The mission remained complete, and Derek Rodriguez would never, ever forgive the people who had tried to destroy everything he held sacred. Some wounds were meant to stay open, serving as permanent reminders of the price of betrayal. Linda and Bryce would carry those wounds for the rest of their lives, while Derek built something beautiful on the ruins of their schemes. That was victory. That was justice. That was the only ending Derek's enemies deserved. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.